Time. Oh, this thing called time. You know, where we get a chance when we reach a point in our life journey to think about the present, to think about the experiences of all of our past that has brought us to this point in our life journey, to think about all of the things that we have yet to learn and see in the future. I kind of reached an introspective point in time this year when I hit the big double nickel. And our 4 children began flying the nest. And my wife and I looked at one another and thought, 30 years, where did it go? Right? And got a chance to think back and think about when I was a young boy and growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia as a farm kid, a rural kid, listening to my elders, to the people who were educating me and my family, my grandparents, my parents, talk about things like, now Ronnie, don't forget that you need to clean your plate. Because there are lots of children around the world, I see some nodding heads, that won't have enough to eat tonight. Or things like a chicken in every pot will create world peace and prosperity. Or things like, for those of us old enough in the room to remember the little ditty that started one of my favorite TV shows called The Beverly Hillbillies. Now let me tell you about a story about a man named Jed who worked so hard to keep his family fed. Food was noble. Food was to be preserved. Food took hard work to produce back in that time and place. And I distinctly remember in 1973, dates myself a little bit, as a 12-year-old kid, sitting in an audience listening to the man who happened to be the Secretary of Agriculture of the United States at the time. His name was Earl Butz. He was from Indiana. And Mr. Butz was well known for being quite a rapateur. And he stood in front of this audience and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have to feed a population that by the end of this century will be double what it is today. And we've got to deploy and get all hands on deck. We have to have every bit of science and technology applied to our food system, and we have to plant fence row to fence row all of the most productive land in America where agriculture had been raised to new levels of productivity that we had never seen before." And it was at that point in my life that I decided that I wanted to become an agricultural scientist. And I wanted to be part of the team that was going to solve that problem. And I wanted to be part of the team that was going to create that innovation and that was going to help feed the world at the time. But Secretary Butz said, we're going to throw everything at it. Every input, every resource, as much water, as much soil, as much land as we possibly can to be able to feed those people. So as I went into that field and became a geneticist and worked to better improve ways to produce animal protein within the food supply, we went through the 80s and we went through the 90s and we began to approach the end of the century, and guess what we did? We produced actually more than we ever dreamed we would produce, so much so that we ended up with surpluses of cereal grains and of animal proteins, and we had to figure out what we were going to do with those in the United States because we had so much plenty and so much bounty, and our food became cheaper and more convenient. Everybody relate to that? And we became very complacent about our food system. In fact, we began to disinvest in research and innovation around agricultural sciences as the United States had led the world for decades previous to that time. And then this thing called time. We hit the new millennium. And only now, a decade and a half ago, we started waking up and realizing that we would soon pass the 7 billion people on the planet mark. And indeed we did in 2010. And by the UN's Food and Ag Organization's estimates, they were saying to us that by mid-century, by 2050, that we would need to double our food supply around the world to meet the needs of a population that was expected to be at 9.6 billion people on the planet. And by the end of the century, that we should expect a population of 11 billion people on the planet around the world. And as opposed, in that deja vu kind of way of time, to when we were talking about that in the 1970s, guess what? We didn't have everything to throw at it. We didn't have the opportunity to deploy more land and more soil and more water, in particular, more water under a changing climate and a more variable climate as we move forward into the future. And now we say that in order for my granddaughter, my 4-year-old granddaughter, who I expect to see, hopefully, that she will see that next century and be looking into the eyes of her children and grandchildren in a prosperous world, that we will have to more than triple today's food production in a society where today, oh, by the way, we waste 40% of the food energy that we produce. And I would wager to you that we have never had a challenge for this millennial generation. We often think of human health, we often think of digital technology. Doesn't it amaze you to watch the students walking around the University of Nebraska campus like this? That digital technology is phenomenal, how it has changed our lives, but I would wager to you that the grand challenge of this generation, of the millennial generation, is that feeding of 11 billion people sustainably in growing our natural resource base. And ladies and gentlemen, I would also suggest to you that in today's culture and climate, a truth to speak here, that we in fact have become an organization, a people, a culture that maybe perhaps is moving backward, because instead of talking about needing to sustainably intensify our production systems and use all science and technology that is proven and effective and safe, we now are having debates about walking away from science and technology. We're now having debates about perhaps using more land resources to produce rather than fewer. And I would submit to you that that will not solve our problems long term. We need to employ and use that science and innovation. We need to have the very best minds and the brightest minds attaching themselves to this problem and challenge as we move forward. So it is my hope and dream, and this thing we call old time, that when my granddaughter and your children and grandchildren reach that end of century mark, that we will have a planet with an improved natural resource base, with a sustainable natural resource base, because we have innovated our food system with all of the best science, technology, and innovation moving forward. And I couldn't be more bullish on the future. Go Big Red.